Okay, everyone, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. I get to share the microphone with another amazing co-host who was on another podcast of mine, and we talked about that. So we'll have links to there as well. But Christa's here with me today. We're going to talk about her podcast. We're going to talk about music. We're going to talk about Canva. We're going to talk about finding a podcast coach and Christa's journey as well. And you get to get a new podcast to fall in love with. Win, win, win. Here on the How to Podcast series, Christa, welcome as my co-host. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Dave. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm thrilled to be here on this podcast today.
We were chatting about my shirt, which you can't see if you're not watching on video, but it says, "What's a podcast?" And then it has my howtopodcast.ca website on it. And I created this on TeePublic. And we're talking about using Canva then to create these shirts and logos and stuff, uploading them to TeePublic, and then having your own store where if somebody buys your shirt, you make money. And you can make shirts and all kinds of stuff, stickers and stuff for your podcast, and it doesn't cost you anything.
And they ship for you.
And they ship for you for free.
That's the best.
You don't have to buy a box of shirts and have them in your office or behind you. You don't have to pay for any shipping. It's all handled for you on TeePublic. I'll have a link in the show notes if you want to go check out my shirts. But and I created the little onesie for my new granddaughter, Delilah.
You've got to share how cute this onesie is. You were describing it to me, and it sounds adorable.
Yeah, so it's white, and it has Future Podcaster on it with flowers and butterflies, all pinks and purples and stuff. And I got to create that for my granddaughter, which is I felt quite proud to be able to do that, to be honest, to hand that to them and go, I made this. So, So anyways, it's kind of cool. So I'm going to start. I met her, she was like 2 days old, and we were already starting to plan her new podcast. So that's my goal, is we're going to have a podcast for her. She'll be the youngest podcaster in the world.
She's going to be so popular.
She's like a week and a day old. She's a week and a day old, so I'm going to help her do that. So, yeah. So, Delilah, we're going to have your podcast. Amazing. So, tell everybody where you are in the world and about your podcast. Let's talk about that to start.
Well, I am in lovely Minnesota in the United States. And for those who don't know where Minnesota is, we are very north, the northern part. Beautiful this time of year. We're in the summer, so we are known for our 10,000 lakes here, thus bringing the humidity, but it's beautiful. I love Minnesota, born and raised here. Winter's not loving it usually so much. We have a ton of snow and lots of cold, but we're equipped. We can handle it here. Yes. So good here stuff. I am. My podcast is brand new. I just launched it in July of 2023, and it is called Powerful Whispers, Hearing God for the Body, Soul, and Spirit.
Awesome. Tell us who it's for. What's it about?
So I have two different branches for my Powerful Whispers podcast. So my first and my main focus is Tuesdays, which is called Faith in Motion, for those who want to hear myself talk about my faith journey, and then I love to interview others. So that's happening on Tuesdays. And Wednesday, because I am a dietitian and I worked for over 20 years in a culinary test kitchen, I love to talk about food. So Wednesdays is Wellness Wednesdays, where I talk about my secret, super easy to make recipes, or talk about a food that is super healthy and how to use it. Then I'm also going to be interviewing people and their favorite dishes as well.
Wow. So I love the variety. That's great. Tell me, just one episode doing better than the other? I know Wellness Wednesdays are relatively new, but do you seeing any kind of indication from your listeners of what they're listening to?
Well, so my Faith in Motion, I have more listens because it's been out more, and I have more episodes as well. So Wellness Wednesday, less than a week old. It's interesting to look at the analytics that people listened all the way up to the outro, and some still listen to the outro, but no one dropped off. I don't think that happens ever, right? That no one drops off until the end. So that just shows that people are interested in health and wellness, and hopefully my tips and tricks. So that was fun to see.
Okay, so let's talk about analytics a little bit. Because I know that when you get to the end of an episode of a podcast, and if I did it right here, probably it would happen if I said to you, Christa, tell us where we could find you. Where are you most active online? Where's your website? As soon as people hear that, most people go, I'm done. And they stop listening, right? So I'm playing with this approach for my interview podcast where I say, okay, Christa, before I ask my last question of you, and I've been saving this for the end of the podcast, before I ask you this really important question, where can we find you online? And it's like, my listeners are like, oh, dang. Oh, now I got to stay. Right.
You have that hook.
See?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So move that little thing further away from the end of the podcast where you have your guest promote. So let's do it now. Where can people find you? Where do they do that? Let's do that now.
Okay. Well, since we're talking about podcasts today, my website is powerfulwhisperspodcast.com. So there you go.
Easy.
And then I'm on the main podcast. I actually don't know how many main podcasts there are outside the United States, but Spotify and Apple are my two main ones. And then there's other ones, Outcast and Google and all the things like that. Good. So the Powerful Whispers podcast is where you find me.
Awesome. See how we did this? We've moved into this right up near the beginning. Now all the audience members are like, are we done? No, we're not done. We just started. So I just love playing with that and move that around. So as you bring people on, just move that little call to action thing, play with it, try it up front.
I like that.
I did one episode where I had my guests and I did it. I'm like, hey, everybody, my guest today is Dave Campbell. He has the howtopodcast.ca website. He has 7 podcasts and he's here today to talk about this. Welcome, Dave, to the show. I did it at the very beginning. And it's like, my guest is like, I guess I don't need to say my website. Thank you. And we got right into the conversation, and that's
smart.
So play with it, right?
I like
and then
that.
Look at your analytics.
So I have I'm going to call it maybe a closing hook, but I have to figure out like how to have that in. So for every guest, I ask them what their beautiful body tip is. So like hoping that they're going to stay till the end because that's going to be the closer.
Nice.
So I don't have it at the very end yet. So I might have to move that to the very end.
And then when I do my edits for my author podcast, I take a quote, something my guest said during the interview, usually near the end of the interview where people would drop off. Yes. And I do that at the intro. So the idea is for that podcast, and I'm playing with this, is when you press play on an episode for Living the Next Chapter, you don't hear my voice first, you hear my guest. And then when you listen to the very end of the podcast, the very last person you hear is my guest. You start with their voice, you end with their voice in every episode. And it's very interesting because it's all about the guest in that show. Yeah. It's not about me. I'm not an author. So I'm just there to host. So I want everyone to connect with my guest at the beginning, to hear you first. And then I come in, I do my thing, and then they hear you at the very end say goodbye.
I love that. And that shows me that you really know how to edit well. I'm new on this editing journey, and I can edit like the episode as is to take clips and move it to the front. I've done it, but it's really clunky right now. So I think with time, I'll be able to do that.
And for me, I'm using Audacity because I have been using it for music production. Nice. So I would do stuff with bands and stuff and recordings before I started as a podcaster. So I'm just taking my skill set from that and bringing it into podcasting. So for somebody who's new in Audacity or learning it might be a little bit of a learning curve, but once you figure it out, it's just wash, rinse, and repeat. It's the same thing over and over again. So you get into this pattern.
And I was mentioning to you before that we started that Audacity has been challenging for me. I had so many issues, and my 18-year-old son was like, this is too complicated. You need to find a new place to record your episode. So I did move away from Audacity because I didn't have someone holding my hand, showing me what do I have to do next. So it's nice that you had that background of playing with music and you figured Audacity out first before you started with the podcast.
So tell everybody what you're using now.
So I'm using Riverside. A girlfriend of mine has used Riverside for probably a year, and she sold me on it. She said, this is so easy. You can make your own audiograms with it and your videograms as well. Yeah. Like, okay, that's great. I need easy. one site to go to do it all for me. So I don't have to have a list of, okay, now what website do I have to go to? Riverside's worked great. I like the fact that I can also pull in very easily the whole video and put it onto YouTube, which I haven't done yet. Probably should do that next. And then Riverside syncs really well with Spotify, which is where I host my podcast. So
good.
It's worked great. I've been happy.
Perfect. Yeah. And their support is really good too. I've been using them for a long time. And I actually had an interview on Riverside with a guest, and something happened. Something tragically happened to the recording and it was lost. And I went into the chat feature. They were able to pull it up. They were able to rescue the entire episode.
Nice.
And they were there with me the entire time. So if you need support, we talked about support. That's another bonus of that.
I love
They're
tech
amazing.
Support.
They're amazing.
Yes, I agree. I've had to reach out to them a couple times and they fixed things immediately, or if it didn't need fixing, they just had to say, oh, look at this part of the screen.
Yeah.
They helped greatly. Good. So
good. Awesome. Good tools. Good tools. So for social media, what are you finding is working for interaction with your listening audience? How are you building your community on social media?
So I'm trying to build it in Instagram. So I have for my regular page, so I have Christa Joy Ministries, and so that's my largest following is there. So it's like, well, people know me, see me there. I broke off and I have Powerful Whispers podcast page. So that's super new, just a couple hundred followers, which is great and fine. So playing around with how do I get more people? And I'm seeing that, as with anybody on Instagram, you probably know, if you have a video clip, no matter what that is, if it's showing your podcast, or just last weekend, I went on live and just talked about this week's episode is XYZ and talked about it, that I got more views. So hopefully getting more followers there. So the interesting thing is Twitter just changed its name like today, I guess, maybe. I don't know. I'm not following all of that, but I'm new on Twitter. And I thought, well, I'm just going to check it out. Don't know what I'm doing. But the interesting thing is, for very few followers on there, I have more interaction. And so I used what's it called? Bitly, where you can have a link and you can see who's clicking on it and actually going to your episode. That the Twitter people are actually clicking on it more than Instagram. So got to play around with Twitter a little bit more, or X. Is that the new
X
name?
now? I'm not sure what's going on. It's so crazy. And then we have Threads for Instagram. It's another thing, right?
I'm on it. And then after 2 days, I'm like, I can't do another one.
Right. There's so many things out there to be on. And I think you need to focus in on one, maybe two that are easy for you as the host.
Yeah.
Right. And
build
consistency and build engagement, put that social back in social media. Right. And the biggest thing, I think we've talked about this in the past, and I've mentioned it on the show, is go into your DMs for your Instagram followers, pick 5 and give them a voice message. Let them know. Yeah. Okay. And did you get any response?
No, but they listened.
There you go.
So that's as a start.
Good.
They might have been like, what? I didn't know you knew that I was following you. Might have scared them a little bit.
Yeah. I love it though. It's something that people will have to click. If you see that in a DM, a little play button, you have to push the button. There's no way you're not going to ignore that. You're like, why? What do I have a play button for? What is this? Right.
They didn't unfollow me. So there you go.
There you go. So that's really cool. And then you can give them shout outs in your podcast as well. You can say, this week on Instagram, I've had these new followers. I want to say hi to Dave. I want to say hi to Christa. I want to say hi to Stephanie. Thanks for following me on Instagram.
That's great. Ooh.
And then they're like, wait a minute. She said my name. Right?
I love that. People love to hear
that
you're noticing
their
them.
Name. Yeah, they do. They do. So, and if you can speak to your audience, that's even better. If you can do this kind of setup, that's great. Or a voice message that you could play in your podcast. That's great.
That's good.
Any kind of feedback that you can hear, they can hear their voice on your show. That's another level altogether, because now they're actually in the podcast. And then what does that tell your community? If I reach out to Christa, I'm going to end up on the show.
Right.
That's awesome.
That's right. Because there's a lot of people that like to be like, hey. Then they can tell their friends, hey, I was on so-and-so's podcast.
Right. That's what I'm doing.
That's cool.
So what I'm working on right now for my show is I'm doing the Podcaster's Corner. And it's kind of like in Canada, in Toronto, Ontario, we had a thing called Speaker's Corner a long time before the internet. That's how old this is. And you could go into this phone booth type setup inside of a building. They had a street entrance. You could drop in some coins and a video camera would come on and you could record anything you want. And then they would put it on television. So my wife and I did that on our 10th anniversary. We were down in Toronto on holidays, and we went into Speaker's Corner, it was called. And we gave tips on what we've learned in 10 years of marriage. Okay, we recorded it. It was like 30 to 60 seconds. That's it. And we went on with our day. We are on the top 10 moments on Speaker's Corner to date.
Wow.
25 years later, we're still being played and we're still captured.
Impressive.
And our stuff is like funny, I guess. But there's also people like Mike Myers from movies.
No way.
He was in the same booth before he was famous, talking to the camera, musicians, all kinds of people were there, and us. So
cool.
It's pretty cool. So what I'm doing I'm a podcast is I'm doing a Podcaster's Corner instead of Speaker's Corner. And I'm asking people to leave me a message and answer a question and then tell me about your show in your answer. And I'm going to play the answer in my podcast. So right now, the current question is, if you only had one call to action at the end of your podcast, what would it be and why? And give me a promotion for your show at the same time. Tell me about your podcast.
Oh,
so I'm putting that out to all the listeners saying, now,
here's your chance.
The danger in this is nobody might respond. And I'll be like, okay, so there's that. So that could happen. It's going to take some time to build it up, but I want people to promote their show.
Yes.
More than anything, I want you to promote your show. I want people to hear about your podcast. That's the big thing.
Free advertising, and it's going to live forever.
Right?
That's great.
Okay, so
I love your story.
Thank you. So I'm going to steal your answer now, and it might be the only answer I get to my question this month. Ready? But I want you to be one of my answers. Can you do this? If you had one call to action, one thing you could ask your listeners to do at the end of your podcast, what would it be? So go to my website, buy my book, buy my whatever, subscribe, follow, whatever. What would that be? What thing? And why would you pick that? Why is that important to you? And then promote your show. Okay. So I'm going to pretend that you are now answering my question. So what would that be? One call to action. What would it be?
Okay. Oh, but I'm going to have my one call to action be blended into kind of two. How about that?
I love it.
So my call to action is go and listen to one of my episodes and rate the episode.
Nice.
So what I've heard this week is that if you have ratings on your episode, that allows the algorithms to see your episode be seen by more people.
There you go.
So it's like a double win for both of us, right? And then I will be doing a shout out for those people that are leaving ratings. Thank you. And I already forgot what your other question was.
It was just to promote the show. Tell everybody your show.
Check out Powerful Whispers podcast.
There you go. See, that's how easy it is. So I'm doing that at the end of my podcast episodes, at the end, again. So those who listen to the end and don't fall off get to hear that opportunity to promote their show. Right? So you have to listen to the end to find out what the question for the next month is going to be. And then you respond back through my speak pipe on my website, which is a recording option. You hit record. I hear your voice. I grab the file and drop it into the episode. So there you go.
I love how advanced you are in your knowledge of technology and all the fun things that people can do in their podcast. I learned so much from you, and I was binge listening to more of your episodes today. So that's pretty cool. Like, okay, the last one I was listening to was like your top 10 tips for show notes.
Mm.
So didn't finish that episode before I
Okay.
hopped on with you. But
Oh, wow.
I need to improve the show notes and help with that SEO searchability.
Good. Okay. So what were your thoughts about show notes before listening to that episode? And what are you kind of contemplating now?
I didn't really understand the value of the show notes and that they were searchable. That was new to me, that the algorithms are actually looking at that content. So you have to have it be crisp, right? And succinct, and probably using some keywords throughout, I think is what you said, right? It's not just like in one spot, but you have to use those SEO keywords throughout.
Right. So think of your listener coming to a search engine and asking a question. So how do I change the oil in my car? That's how people go to a search engine, right?
Yes.
They don't type in changing oil in car. They usually put it in the form of a question, kind of like Jeopardy, basically.
How do I? Yes,
right?
good.
So that's kind of what they're doing, is they're coming looking for your podcast topics in question form. Nice. So if you can figure out how the question's being asked, then put the question in the title of your show and into your show notes, so that when somebody comes and says, how do I create better nutritious food for my children, and you have an episode specifically on that, Google goes, oh, person searching for this topic, come on over here to Christa's episode because she talks about that, right? And they make that connection.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, since you know so much, since you have 7 podcasts, 7 different podcasts. That's amazing. Okay. So for example, last week I had my Wellness Wednesday, where I was talking about how to make homemade bone broth, and you can make it essentially for free because it's with items that you already have in your house. Okay, so is it more intriguing to have, like, not calling out bone broth in your title, and it's like, here's how to make something that's healthier for your gut health or for immune health? Like, do you make it intriguing, or do you call out what they're gonna learn?
So what the beauty is of podcasting is you can play with this title and show notes anytime you want. And you can practice, you can figure out what works for your audience. So you could do how bone broth helps gut health. Well, that's interesting, because you have bone broth, you have gut health. That's right in the title, right? So you can try that. And then you can then do an episode or change the episode title of a previous recorded episode and tweak it and change it and see if you get some new search engine juice out of it just by changing the title or changing your show notes. So you can play with this anytime you want.
That's good to know. Now, would you want to repost it as a new episode, or so you're keeping the episode there, you can just change it, and then if that doesn't get any new views, just go back to what you originally had?
Or redo the episode with a new episode that maybe there's an update, maybe there's something else you want to talk about. You could do my top five recipes over the last 30 episodes. Here are the top 5 downloaded podcast episodes around this topic. And I'm going to put them all together, just a short recap of my best episodes for you. Because the beauty of podcasting is you have new listeners showing up during the parade. Okay, not everyone starts at the beginning of the parade. Some people join it, the parade is in progress. So they've missed some of what's already gone by, and they're joining halfway through or near the end, right there. So they don't know what's already happened. So imagine if that parade came all the way around again and started all over again. You're like, oh, there it is. That's the thing that I missed. So people are coming to your show on episode 10, 20, 100. And for the most part, not everyone's going to go back to episode 1. They're going to start where they arrived and continue from there. So they don't know about the episodes you've done in the past. So it's okay to talk about them again. And for your audience that loves you, they don't mind hearing it again because they might have forgotten about it. They might have missed something. So bring them back, talk about them again, or link them back to it and say, Christa's on the show today. So glad to have Christa here. Christa and I talked earlier about this topic, and there's a link in the show notes. If you want to hear Christa's episode from 6 months ago, where we talked about A, B, and C, then click the link and go listen to that episode as well. So you're sending them back into your catalog back in time. And that's the beauty. And one thing you need to consider when you look at analytics is an episode that's been there longer has more chance for listens compared to a new episode.
Oh, sure. Makes
so
sense.
Don't compare episode 1 to episode 100.
Okay.
If episode 1 has been out for a year and episode 100 just released yesterday, it's kind of unfair to compare the listenership there because the other ones had longer to gain more listens. So I like to look at my most current episodes. Usually I look back around 7 days to see how that episode's doing compared to the episode before it and its 7-day track. Right. So every episode, I look at each episode in 7-day increments and I compare that. Am I doing better week to week, episode compared to episode, instead of comparing all of my episodes against each other? Because it's kind of unfair.
And it does seem like 7 days is a key, right? Yeah. That I've seen charts talk about if you have 33 downloads in your first 7 days, then you're in the top 50% of all podcasts. Like, that's a really low number.
Yeah, right.
It gives great perspective and helpful for those new podcasters. Like, oh, maybe with 33 downloads that you are going to be in that top 50%, which is pretty amazing. And it was encouraging to me to see that actually.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah. And I think the one thing that people get caught up in analytics is they compare themselves to other people instead of comparing yourself to yourself. Right. And that's dangerous because other podcasts might have a team of 20. They might have a budget. They might have a staff writers that write all the podcasts. They have a team that promotes on social media. You're one person doing everything. So it's really hard to compare with someone else. You need to compare to yourself. And if you're seeing your episodes over time getting more listenership, listening longer, I think is more important than people coming for the first 5 minutes and leaving. Like you put a lot of time and effort into your show. You're not just going to, 5 minutes is great, but I want you to listen to the entire thing. So as you're tracking your listenership through the episodes, that's really wise because you're going to learn some stuff too. Like maybe something's happening at the 3-minute mark and you find out that you talk about your cat at the 3-minute mark every time. And people are like, why is this a cat podcast? I was here for nutritional ideas for my meals, not a cat. Right. And you're like, maybe I should take the cat part out. I don't know.
I'm laughing because literally the episode that is going to go live today, I'm the host, my guest talked about her cat and it was fascinating and a fun fact.
Good.
So then I talked about my cat. I'm like, oh, no, I took it out. I thought it was too much about cats in the beginning and nothing to do with what we were going to talk about in the episode. So I left her fun fact in there because it was great. She's talking about her cute cat and the fun name.
Yeah.
So left that in, but yeah, I took out my rambling about my cute cat.
The beauty of having a podcast is there is no podcast police to come and say you're doing it wrong. So play with it. But then look at the analytics. And like I said, if you listen back to that show and had you kept your part in about your cat, which is fine, you can do whatever you want. It's your show, right? But if you find that it seems like there's a pattern to when people leave the show, then go to that part in the podcast and go, what's happening here? Right? Good. Maybe there's something happening. So one of the key things I like to do when I do an interview, if I ask my guest a question and the answer is like not relevant. So for example, if I said to you, what's your favorite seafood recipe? And you're like, I'm allergic to seafood. Do you see how it just stopped right there? Like, so you don't have a favorite seafood recipe? No, I'm allergic to seafood. I can't eat it. If you feel that awkward silence right there.
Yes.
So what I do is I go back and I just delete the question and then delete the answer. It never happened. Because why leave that in there? Yes. I asked maybe on my point, I maybe asked a bad question because I didn't know my guest.
Okay.
Maybe that could be my fault. So I'm just going to delete that. And my guest will never even know. So I went from a really good point to a really bad point to a really good point. I'm just going to take the bad point out and just continue as if it never happened. And that might be that point where people listening would drop off. So I just remove that section like you did. Remove that section so I could just let it flow.
That's a great point. I'm chuckling, okay, because I am allergic to Just
Are you?
seafood.
Oh no, I just pulled that out of the air. No way. That's hilarious.
What else are you going to pull out? That's so funny.
Wow, that's funny.
But that's great. And there could be someone that has a coughing attack or a sneezing attack. And I love that you can just pull that out because you have that control as you're editing throughout. But yeah, those awkward questions of you're throwing your guest off balance, like, okay, we'll just remove that and move on.
And I think the one thing that helps for your guest, especially if they're new, is if you tell them that we're going to be editing today's podcast. So don't think you have to be perfect. You can tell them, I'm a host of the show. I'm not perfect. If you heard all the things I take out of my show, you'd be surprised. Because it sounds like it was really clear and concise and organized, but I just took out all the bad stuff. You don't know. So when we're doing our interview together, I want you to relax because if something happens during the interview, I can just remove it. I've had UPS drivers arrive at my guest's house. Ding dong, ruff, ruff, ruff. The dogs start barking and they're looking at me like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, it's fine. Because when the episode comes out, you'll never even know what happened.
Yeah.
Coughing, sneezing attacks, and apologies every time it happens during the recording. I'll take them all out. You won't even know.
Easy
So
to do.
let's just don't think you have to be perfect as a guest. Just show up, have a great conversation, be engaging, have fun, laugh, talk about your cat, and I'll take care of the rest. Right?
That's great. What I have found, so I started my whole journey the last couple of years of putting myself out there in public as a writer, and every single word is looked at and critiqued, I feel. But in podcasting, it's not like that. You can have, it's like real life, and you can have those laughs and the funny moments, which I think are, I mean, one, you can have as an outtake.
Yeah, exactly. Those are great.
People like the outtakes.
Yeah.
But they want to get to know you. That's why they're listening to the podcast. So you can be more relaxed and not worry about having things so eloquently stated as you would in writing.
Amazing. So, Christa, for a new podcaster who's listening to our conversation today, and maybe they want to start a podcast around seafood or cats or whatever, but they're afraid to start. There's either money concerns, time concerns, technical skills. They're concerned about that. Who's going to listen to my show? Why should I do this, Christa? What would you say to that person listening right now from your perspective with your show that could encourage them to get over that hurdle, whatever that is?
So just do it. Jump in, because it is surprising to see how many people really want to hear from you about whatever the topic is. They're excited to have this new interaction. But I definitely held myself back, was like, just overwhelmed with all the technology. And it wasn't so much the cost for me that was holding me back. It was the figuring technology out. But there's great free things to do. From Zoom has free options, and even Riverside has free options, and Audacity, of lots of places to jump into and just start recording. So I had this lovely opportunity to join a how-to podcast class.
Nice.
And it was perfect for me. She was cutting her teeth on our group, and she did amazing. Got community with these other new podcasters. So we would take turns and we listen to each other's podcasts and say, I think you should do X, Y, and Z, and kind of change it up. And like, your audio is bad, because mine was. So I learned a lot from having these people give me feedback before I actually launched my podcast. So that was helpful. And through that process of communicating with my coach and these other new podcasters, it helped me be, like I said, more confident. Like, okay, I can do this. People are interested in what I'm saying. It might be a small group, and that's okay. You got to start somewhere. Another thing I did was I reached out to some friends and said, would you be on my podcast launch team?
Nice.
And would you listen to my podcast in that first week? Because, of course, there's algorithms with everything on social media. So that first 7 days of having some core friends that are going to listen and also share on their social media, like, hey, I just listened to Christa's new podcast. Check it out. Here's the link. That helped get some new listeners that might not ever have known about me before. So
nice. It's great. Yeah. And I just think there's so many people in the world that have a great message. And I would hate to know that there was one thing that could be erased that would make it easier for them to start a podcast. And they just didn't know how to address that one thing. And had we taken that out of the equation, they'd be podcasting today. But they're in the planning stages for years. They're afraid of the right microphone or the right platform or the right name for their podcast. It's overwhelming to all of the little things that seem to pile on the moment you say, I want a podcast. Then you have these experts who throw all these other things at you now. You have to be an expert in this, and this. You got to learn all these different things. And you're just like, I just want to record a podcast.
Right.
I'm not here to learn how to record, fix audio and do video and do all these things. I just want to share my message. And I think if we can eliminate some of that by our conversation and encourage somebody that it is possible for anyone to have a show, there could be a lot of great shows out there then.
Absolutely. There's so many shows that are doing this and it's not costing them any money.
Right.
And I've not done this because I don't have that fancy of a phone, but you can record your podcast on your phone.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have all the fancy microphones and lights, especially for a podcast. No one is going to see you unless you post it on YouTube.
Right. And I think you can always start with for free. You can always do those options. And then as the podcast grows, then you want to improve, you can always improve. But you don't have to start with a $4,000 budget, an expensive microphone, the best of the best of the best. When I bought my first car, I didn't go and buy the most exotic, fancy $1 million car there was. I started out with a very simple car that I had to hold together with prayers and tape to keep it on the road, right? Just to keep this thing running, because it's all I could afford. But I got a car and I was able to drive, but I just had to adjust it to what I could afford. And for people podcasting, you might have to start off with a very simple way of doing it, but you can always buy a better car. You can always buy a better mic. You can always move up as things grow and as you get more comfortable, but don't let money be the thing that stops you from starting your show.
And something that I remember, a guest that I was listening to, not of my guest, I was listening to someone else, that they said, like, they had 200 episodes out there. And they said, go back and listen to her first 2 episodes. And she grew a lot. And her first 2 were rocky and not polished. Not that, you have to be polished, but she learned and grew as she was out there sharing her message. And her followers, grew and loved as she was growing, with her. So I don't know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, no,
it's
that's good.
People, not everyone has it figured out in the first episode. I've heard the first 50 to even 100 episodes. It's okay. You got to be figuring things out and just don't hold yourself back. If you have a message to share, just start now and figure it out as you go.
It's great. Yeah. Like for my How to Podcast series, this one, I started out with episodes 1 to 5. I had this weird music that it's all I had at the time, but it was like, oh, we'll start with this. But then I listened back to it now that I have different music for my show. And I'm like, oh, that is not what I like. So all I did was go back and I just changed the music. I kept everything else, but I just changed the intro music so they all sound the same.
Nice.
Yes, I still sound new at what I'm doing, but my music's consistent all the way through. And I just went back in Audacity and changed the song. It was really simple, reloaded it back up to my host, didn't change it, didn't release it as a new episode, just overwrote it. And if you've heard that episode in the past, you won't know that I changed my music. But if you find me today and you're like, I want to go back to episode 1, it's going to be the same music from episode 1 to episode 115 all the way through. So, and that was me being nerdy. That's all that was.
And you can be. It's your show. You can do whatever you want.
Whatever you want. It's great. So before we go, one last tip from you for someone starting a podcast. What's one thing you wish somebody told you when you started that now you're like, this is really important to me, or this is something I really do treasure? Is there something that you wish you knew from day one?
Boy, definitely. I lack confidence in my voice being out there and what am I going to sound like? What are people going to think? But I'm going to go give a shout out to my coach. She's like, you have to embrace yourself. You have to be just confident in yourself and just do it.
I love it.
Yes.
That's good. I love that. So for me, it would be, if I had that answer that question, I think it would be, don't worry about the audience. They will find you and they will stay with you if you show up and you really care for them. If you care for your audience and you demonstrate that by, if they respond to you with an email or a voicemail, you respond. If they show up on your Instagram, you give them a message. You put yourself out there and you throw the spotlight on your listeners and your guests. Good things will happen to you. It's going to take time, though. And I think that's the biggest thing people are afraid of. They start a podcast, and after episode 3, they want to sponsor and they want to make money, and it's like,
no.
Like if I went and started a small business today, it would take me 3 years to get to being almost self-sustaining, where I could actually pay for my business. It doesn't happen in week 1 of starting a small business. Podcast is like a small business. You're going to have to build your community, your customer base, your listeners. Absolutely. It's going to take time. So slow down, focus on your listeners, do your best, and then improve. Listen to people like Christa and get her advice and follow her journey. And, Christa's doing it, and you can do this as well. So as a listener to the show, it's right there in front of you. Christa can do it. You can do this. Yes. So do your podcast.
That's right. And here's a tip. Find some other newbie friends. Be each other's cheerleader. It helps on those days that you're like, I don't want to record today. Reach out to your friend who might also be in the same boat, and you will encourage each other to show up, press record. You'll be so glad you did.
There you go. Awesome. Okay. So, Christa, one more time. I know we've done it several times today, which I love. Where do we find your show? And where are you most active?
So I'm most active on Instagram, and you can find me on Powerful Whispers Podcast on Instagram. And that's also the name of my show. So check me out on Apple Podcast or on Spotify.
There you go, everyone. Please go check out Christa. Thank you so much, Christa, for being here and being part of the show. Thank you for all your contributions, and congratulations on your podcast. I hope, I know that things are going to be really good for you and good stuff is going to happen. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me today.